There comes a moment in every soul's evolution where the desire for closure dissolves. Not because the story doesn't matter anymore, but because you finally understood the lesson it came to deliver. Closure used to mean hearing the apology, receiving the explanation, or witnessing justice unfold. You once believed that peace depended on someone else acknowledging what they did, or at least recognizing the depth of your pain. But the truth is, the people who broke you often don't have the awareness to fix you, and the ones who left without clarity usually did so because they couldn't face the reflection you held up to them. When you reach the stage of true inner growth, you stop chasing those moments of validation. You understand that seeking closure from the same place that caused your pain only keeps you trapped in the same loop. The wound becomes a cycle. Each time you revisit it, you reopen it. But when you begin to see the bigger picture, you realize that closure is not an external event. It's an internal decision. It's the point where understanding replaces explanation and acceptance replaces expectation. You start to see that the purpose of every painful ending wasn't to teach you how to change others, but how to transform yourself. The silence that once screamed for answers becomes the teacher that reveals why those answers were never the point. Closure, you learn, is not something that arrives when someone finally apologizes. It happens when you stop needing the apology to move forward. It's when you can look at the memory without it defining your worth and remember the story without reliving its sting. You also begin to understand the deeper wisdom behind why certain people vanish, why relationships crumble without warning, and why situations end before they make sense. The universe doesn't owe you an explanation. It offers you evolution. When something leaves your life abruptly, it's often because it has served its spiritual function. The lesson has been transmitted. The rest is up to you. True closure is not about understanding why they did what they did. It's about realizing why you attracted it and what part of you is now ready to heal. You no longer look backward, trying to rewrite what's already been written. Instead, you stand still long enough to see that what once felt like betrayal was actually redirection. You recognize that peace doesn't come from dissecting the past, it comes from integrating its meaning. You start to thank the silence for what it taught you. The strength to hold yourself, the courage to let go without answers, and the wisdom to see that every ending was secretly an invitation to begin again, but this time from a place of awareness, not attachment. And in that awareness, the need for closure fades away naturally. Not because you've forgotten, but because you finally understand that closure isn't something they give. It's something you awaken within yourself when you're ready to walk forward without needing anyone to walk with you. There is a quiet turning point in healing when the anger that once consumed you begins to soften. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins subtly, one moment, one thought, one breath at a time. The people who hurt you, the ones who betrayed your trust or abandoned you when you needed them most, stop occupying your mind with the same intensity. You no longer rehearse what you would say if given the chance. Instead, something unexpected takes its place: compassion. Not sympathy, not justification, but a calm recognition that they, too, were acting from their own wounds. Resentment once felt like protection. It was the armor your heart built to keep you safe from repeating the same pain. But the longer you carried it, the heavier it became. you start to notice that resentment doesn't punish the person who hurt you. It keeps you tied to them energetically and emotionally. You begin to see that holding on to anger keeps you reliving the same moment that broke you. And the irony is, the more you resist forgiveness, the more power you give to the memory. True compassion doesn't excuse what happened, it liberates you from the cycle of suffering attached to it. As you grow in consciousness, you start seeing through the behavior of others rather than reacting to it. You realize that most cruelty comes from confusion, fear, and unhealed pain. People project what they cannot face within themselves. Those who lied to you were probably lying to themselves first. Those who judged you harshly were wrestling with their own shame. Those who left without explanation were running from emotions they couldn't handle. And as this understanding deepens, something shifts. You no longer need to make them villains in your story to make yourself the hero. You simply see that everyone is at a different stage of awakening. Compassion doesn't mean you invite people back into your life. It means you release them from the emotional debt you once believed they owed you. You stop expecting them to understand the pain they caused because you see now that their awareness was limited. You start to look at them as souls, not enemies. You see their brokenness, their confusion, their blindness, and instead of rage, you feel empathy. It doesn't make you weak. It means you've risen above the frequency of pain and stepped into the energy of understanding. When compassion replaces resentment, your body feels lighter, your mind clearer. You stop replaying old conversations in your head because you've found the wisdom behind them. You begin to understand that forgiveness was never about giving someone else peace. It was about returning your own. Compassion is what allows you to finally let go without bitterness. It's the quiet realization that the pain they caused you was the same pain. They were running from within themselves, and by choosing compassion, you end the cycle that once consumed you. There was a time when silence felt unbearable. The stillness seemed too loud, too heavy, almost suffocating. You filled your days with distractions, music, conversations, scrolling, anything that could drown out the noise within. You thought silence meant loneliness, that the quiet was a reminder of what was missing. But as you grew, as your soul began to heal, something began to shift. You started to realize that silence wasn't the enemy. It was the space where truth lived. When your soul reaches a certain level of awareness, silence becomes sacred. It's no longer an absence of sound, but a presence of peace. It's the pause between thoughts where you finally meet yourself without judgment. In that quiet, you can hear the whispers of your intuition, the part of you that always knew the way, but was buried under the chaos of external noise. The silence reveals what you've been avoiding, not to punish you, but to free you, because everything unresolved eventually surfaces when you stop running from yourself. At first, sitting in silence can feel uncomfortable because it strips away every distraction you've used to hide behind. It forces you to face the emotions you buried, the grief you never fully acknowledged, the fears you pretended didn't exist. But instead of drowning in them, you begin to observe them. You watch your thoughts rise and fall like waves. You learn that not every emotion requires reaction. You start to understand that presence itself is healing. That peace is not found in escaping what hurts, but in allowing it to pass through you without resistance. Over time, the silence that once frightened you begins to feel like home. You no longer crave constant noise or validation. You find comfort in your own company. You can sit quietly without the urge to reach for your phone, without replaying past conversations or worrying about the future. You notice the rhythm of your breath, the weight of your body grounding into the moment, and for the first time, it feels enough. You discover that solitude doesn't mean isolation. It means intimacy with your soul. In silence, you start to hear the voice of wisdom that was always there, but overshadowed by fear. You realize that peace isn't something you have to chase. It's what remains when you stop running. The quiet begins to cleanse you from the inside out. It helps you discern what truly matters and what never did. It reconnects you to the natural rhythm of life, the way the universe breathes, expands, and contracts. And slowly, you begin to crave that stillness, not because it's empty, but because it's honest. When you can sit in silence without fear, you've crossed a profound threshold in your healing. You've learned that silence doesn't mean the absence of love or meaning. It means you finally become comfortable with your own presence. The same quiet that once haunted you now holds you gently, reminding you that you are never truly alone when you have learned to be at peace within yourself. There comes a moment in your inner evolution when the exhausting need to be understood, validated, or seen finally dissolves. For so long, your worth felt tied to how others perceived you. Every achievement, every effort, every carefully chosen word carried a quiet plea: see me, believe me, approve of me. You wanted people to recognize your heart, your effort, your goodness. And yet, the more you tried to prove yourself, the emptier you felt, because every attempt to convince someone of your value only confirmed that you didn't fully believe in it yourself. When you begin to awaken, you start to recognize the trap hidden inside validation. You notice how much of your energy was spent performing rather than being. You see how much of your identity was shaped by expectations that were never truly yours. The need to prove yourself is born from a deep wound, a fear of invisibility, a belief that love must be earned. But as your consciousness expands, you begin to see that nothing real can be proven. It can only be embodied. Real confidence doesn't demand attention. It emanates quietly from authenticity. You no longer chase recognition because you realize that external approval can never fill an internal void. You stop explaining your decisions to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop justifying your boundaries, your growth, your silence. You start to understand that the people meant for you will never need convincing. They will simply feel your truth. And the ones who don't understand, you let them go because you finally grasp that being misunderstood is not a threat. It's freedom. When you release the need to prove yourself, you reclaim your energy. You stop bending to fit into spaces that shrink your spirit. You no longer measure your worth by applause or acceptance. Instead, you become guided by alignment, by how things feel in your soul, not how they look to others. You begin to act from a place of wholeness, not desperation. Your self-respect becomes louder than your desire to be liked. And in that quiet shift, your power returns. You start to notice that peace feels better than performance. You'd rather be genuine and unseen than impressive and disconnected. You begin to realize that proving yourself was never about others. It was about convincing the part of you that once felt small, unseen, or unworthy. Now, You no longer need external mirrors to remind you who you are. You've met yourself in your own reflection, in your solitude, in your resilience. Letting go of the need to prove yourself doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop negotiating your worth. You still show up fully, but not for validation, for purpose. You speak your truth not to be heard, but because it's who you are. You act not to impress, but because authenticity has become your natural state. The moment you stop performing for acceptance, you step into a deeper power, the power of simply existing as yourself without apology, without defense, without disguise. There was a time when every trigger felt like an attack. The tightening in your chest, the sudden rush of emotion, the words that pierced deeper than they should have, all of it felt unfair and overwhelming. You believed that the problem was outside of you, that if others changed their tone, their behavior, or their choices, you would finally feel at peace. But as your awareness grew, something shifted. You began to understand that your triggers weren't punishments. They were messengers. They were the soul's way of pointing to what still needed healing within you. Every time you are triggered, a wound is being touched, not created. The reaction you feel is an echo from the past, a memory that was never fully acknowledged. The person in front of you becomes the mirror reflecting a forgotten pain, a suppressed emotion, or an unmet need. When you start to see this clearly, your entire relationship with discomfort changes. You stop running from it. You stop blaming others for awakening it. You start to meet your emotions with curiosity instead of resistance. You begin to ask, what is this feeling trying to show me? At first, this process can feel uncomfortable, even humbling. You start noticing patterns, the same types of people, the same arguments, the same endings. And slowly, you realize it's not life repeating itself to hurt you. It's life trying to get your attention. It's offering you another chance to respond differently. Each trigger becomes a doorway to a deeper level of understanding. Where you once reacted with anger or defensiveness, you begin to pause. That pause is the moment your consciousness expands. It's the moment you shift from the victim of your story to the observer of it. When your triggers become teachers, you begin to see the wisdom in what used to break you. You recognize that the people who irritated you were showing you where your boundaries were weak. The situations that frustrated you were revealing where your expectations were unrealistic. The words that hurt you were exposing where you still carried insecurity. Every reaction becomes a revelation. And in that realization, healing begins, not because you suppress emotion, but because you face it with awareness instead of fear. You learn to hold space for your emotions without judging them. You no longer run from the discomfort because you understand that healing requires feeling. The pain becomes information, not identity. Each time you stay present with your triggers, instead of escaping them, you dissolve a little more of the old story that once defined you. You start to see that the people who once activated your deepest wounds were not obstacles on your path. They were catalysts. They were the mirrors your soul used to remind you of what still needed love, attention, and understanding within you. Eventually, you begin to thank your triggers, not because the pain was pleasant, but because it taught you presence. It taught you self-awareness. It taught you how to stop reacting and start responding, how to turn pain into insight, and how to use every moment of discomfort as a stepping stone toward your own awakening. There comes a stage in your spiritual evolution when you stop forcing, chasing, and questioning everything that isn't unfolding on your preferred timeline. You begin to sense that life operates with a wisdom far greater than your impatience. The delays that once frustrated you, the detours that once confused you, and the endings that once broke you all start to reveal a deeper order beneath their chaos. You start to understand that timing is not random. It is precise, divine, and always aligned with your readiness, not your desire. In the past, you believed that effort alone could bend time, that if you worked harder, loved deeper, or wanted something enough, the universe would have no choice but to comply. But life doesn't move by force, it moves by flow. And the more you tried to control outcomes, the more resistance you created. The universe doesn't respond to fear disguised as urgency. It responds to surrender disguised as faith. Trusting the timing of your life means realizing that you are never late, never behind, and never forgotten. Everything that belongs to you is on its way, but it arrives when you have become the version of yourself capable of receiving it. You start to notice that what once felt like rejection was actually redirection. The doors that closed weren't punishments, they were protection. The silence that followed your efforts wasn't emptiness, it was preparation. The moments when nothing made sense were the sacred pauses where your soul was being recalibrated. You begin to sense that divine timing isn't about waiting for the perfect moment. It's about becoming the person who can recognize the moment when it arrives. Trusting the timing of your life doesn't mean you stop taking action. It means your actions are rooted in peace, not panic. You stop trying to rush your growth or compare your journey to someone else's highlight reel. You understand that comparison is the thief of trust. It tricks you into believing that you're off track when, in truth, you're right where you need to be. You start moving with patience, guided by intuition instead of fear. The waiting no longer feels like punishment. It becomes a sacred space where transformation quietly unfolds. You begin to see patterns in the unfolding of your life, how certain events only made sense years later, how pain often preceded purpose, and how every delay shaped your depth. What once felt like stagnation was actually divine construction. The universe was aligning people, places, and experiences to match the frequency of your next chapter. When you finally release the illusion of control, life begins to flow effortlessly again. You stop grasping for certainty and instead live in rhythm with trust. Trusting the timing of your life is not passive surrender, it's active faith. It's the deep knowing that even the detours are part of the destination. You realize that every experience, every heartbreak, every loss, every waiting season is shaping you into someone who no longer needs to beg the universe for what's next, because you've learned to rest in what is now. There comes a point in your inner evolution when you notice that the weight you once carried no longer feels so heavy. The same challenges that used to consume you now pass through you with less resistance. It's not that life suddenly became easier or that the world changed to accommodate your peace. It's that you changed. You've learned how to hold yourself differently. You've learned how to breathe through the storms instead of fighting against them. You've learned that lightness isn't the absence of pain, it's the result of no longer identifying with it. You used to think freedom meant having no problems, no losses, no heartbreaks. But true freedom is realizing that none of those things can take away your inner stability. You've stopped trying to control everything around you because you've seen that control is an illusion born from fear. You no longer chase after people or situations that drain you. You don't carry stories that were never yours to begin with. You no longer mistake chaos for passion or suffering for proof of depth. Instead, you live with a quiet strength that comes from knowing you can face life without collapsing under it. The heaviness you used to feel wasn't just emotional, it was energetic. It came from constantly replaying the past, worrying about the future, and holding on to narratives that kept you small. But now, you've begun to release those attachments one by one. You've forgiven yourself for not knowing better, for staying too long, for giving too much, for silencing your own needs. And as each layer of self, blame and regret falls away, something inside you begins to rise. You start to notice that peace isn't something you find. It's what remains when you stop clinging to what isn't meant to stay. Feeling light doesn't mean you don't feel deeply anymore. It means you've learned to let feelings move through you instead of defining you. You still experience sadness, anger, or fear, but you don't let them anchor you. You've learned that emotions are messengers, not prisons. You let them speak, you listen, and then you let them go. You no longer resist the ebb and flow of your emotional tides because you understand that every feeling has its place in the rhythm of your soul's growth. You also begin to see that simplicity is sacred. You no longer crave drama, noise, or validation. Peace becomes your priority, and you protect it fiercely. You find beauty in small moments, the stillness of morning light, the quiet of your own breath, the calm in knowing you are enough. The more you release the unnecessary, the more spacious life feels. You stop chasing highs and start living from equilibrium. That's what it means to become lighter, not to float above life, but to walk through it with grace, clarity, and calm strength. You've become lighter not because the world changed, but because you learned how to no longer carry what was never meant for you.